welcome everyone. My name is Patrick Reinmoeller. I'm a professor at IMD, a professor of strategy and innovation, and I have the honor to stand in here for Phil Rosenzweig, a professor emeritus at IMD, and I have the great pleasure to be here together with Mohan Subramaniam. And I'd love to hear more about the latest book that he has written, and just to give you an idea of how it is received. It is one idea in a sea of management ideas, but it is one of those ideas that is standing out. And as such, it was highlighted in the MIT Sloan series. And I think it's fair to quote, a rare breed of an idea, meaningful to practice, grounded in evidence and built for the future. And this book that you have written, The Future of Competitive Strategy, fills this description, or more fully than anything else I've seen recently. The question that I would like to start this off with is, what made you write this book, Mohan?
Thank you, Patrick, for that terrific introduction. Thank you, Paul Milner, for facilitating this. And thanks to IMD for giving such a terrific platform to talk about my book. And of course, a very, very warm welcome to the audience from all over the world. Thank you for being here. So, great question to start, right? Why did I write the book? Now, as you know, Patrick, I come from a competitive strategy background. And as a colleague in the domain of strategy, you'll also appreciate that much of our thinking about competitive strategy that has evolved over the last 40 odd years were really conceived for the industrial world. Now, that is a world where, products were the central focus. Products could be physical products like bicycles or water pumps, or they could be services like bank loans or insurance premiums. But anyway, products were the central focus because products gave 100% of our revenues. Now, that thinking, I felt was inadequate in this new world, wherein a lot of revenue can come from data also. But if you want to think about how to drive value from data or how to compete with data, then the older frameworks that were designed for the industrial world and for products are not really applicable completely for this new world, which is digital and where data drives a lot of your value. So why did I write the book? I wanted to build some insights, concepts, and frameworks with the same depth and rigor that we had for the industrial world. And I wanted to bring that for companies who are looking to generate value in the digital world.
That's great, Mohan. Thank you. Thanks a lot. As a professor, a colleague, a professor of strategy and digital transformation, of course, the transformation element is quite important to us, but also to the audience. Let me expand on this a little bit. Massive amounts of ink has been spilled on companies like Google, Meta, Netflix, and they're called digital titans, and some are enthralled and some are afraid of them, and they are born digital. They are on top of that game. So talking about transformation, how could it be possible that you help legacy companies, legacy firms change themselves, transform themselves, that they somehow could partake of that game that these digital titans are playing? So how could they possibly aspire to do that?
So that's again a question related to the first. In some that's also related to the motivation for me to write this book. And you're right. People have been writing about the Amazons and Facebooks of this world, even before that, about Microsoft and so on and so forth, ever since the arrival of the internet. And for a lot of us in the strategy area, it began as a subset, right? I mean, we used to think of them as tech companies, and they had a tech strategy, and we had our strategy, and they had a tech strategy, and the two are not really connected. Today, it's not so. Okay, if you are thinking about driving value from data, there is a lot to learn from those firms. And a lot of the book essentially takes these insights from these digital platforms, but applies them to what I call legacy firms, or firms that have established their legacies way before the internet came. Now, the point here is this, right? For the longest time, and this is where the motivation for the book comes again, for the longest time, when we talked about digital or digital strategy, we almost equated it to digital platform strategy. Anything digital, we talk about Uber. Any example on digital platforms. Now, that is not necessarily applicable to 95% of the companies of the world, which are legacy firms. So there's a huge need for us to, it's not that we are not considering Amazons and Googles and Facebooks, but we are looking at them, trying to see what they have done with data, and then try to see how do they apply to the business models of legacy firms, and how can legacy firms, like in your words, right, transform themselves or elevate their value generating capacity from what they've been used to doing into something more.
So it's fascinating that you, as an author, are addressing 95% of all companies out there, all the legacy firms. That's a very smart move. That's great. Let's have a look at where the participants are at home, in what kind of sector they are coming from. I'm going to launch a poll that allows you to make a choice. Very simple. Are you part of the manufacturing sector, service sector, or in the extraction? There you go. Service firms, by far the largest groups, and extraction, the minority. So that gives us an indication. And what I find amazing in your take on the future of strategy is that you suggest that, sorry for being blunt, that data is everything. The Economist already has said that data is the new oil and so on. And what I found interesting is that you say there are different kinds of data. Can you expand on this a little bit? You are talking about episodic and interactive data. Please explain.
That's a great question again, Patrick. And thank you for that. Okay. And which is in some ways one of the central fundamental foundations of how I'm thinking about shifting from products to data. Now, first of all, if the Economist says that data is the new oil or new gold, they're not referring to us. I mean, by us, I mean legacy firms. They're not talking about traditional service firms or manufacturing firms or extraction. They are essentially talking about the Facebooks and Amazons of the world, because they have been able to extract some kind of value from data, which was not possible before. And for them, it happened so because of the nature of their business, which was essentially around platforms. Now, if I very quickly, and I'll come to your question about episodic and interactive data very soon, but the genesis, if you think about how the platforms stumbled on in some ways to the value of data, right, or the new gold as we see it, it was not completely obvious initially. So if you think when the internet came and a Netflix came along, or an Amazon came along, it was an alternate business model that essentially was trying to provide the same service that was existing in the industrial world, but using the internet. And what did it do? It essentially allowed that a transaction to happen without physical proximity. So if you wanted to rent a DVD, you don't have to go to the store. You can get it in your home, but then the facilitation happens through the internet. Same thing with Amazon, right? Now, what is the role of data there? The role of data is to enable the interaction without physical proximity. I have information on the DVD that you want. I have information about your address, and I can send it to you. So you don't need to come to the store. Now, that's how it began, okay? And if you remember, for the longest time, Facebook, which had essentially managed to create social networks without physical proximity, could meet friends without actually meeting them, they had no idea how to monetize this. Okay, it took about 8, 9, 10 years before they figured that out. So data at that time was an enabler. But today, the role of data for them is very different. And the reason for that is that their kind of data is what I call interactive data. Whereas for legacy firms, the kind of data that they use is episodic data. And let me give an example. Okay. I go to Barnes and Noble. I spend 2 hours in the store and I walk out with one book, hopefully my book. Okay. So I walk out with one book and think about the data that Barnes and Noble has and what it does with that data. So it has data that somebody has bought a book. Maybe they might tag it to me, but they don't really do anything in real time. And they wait, aggregate, and then build some insights over it. Valuable insights, but they use it in a different way. I call it episodic data because it's built on discrete events. Now you compare this with Amazon, where I spend 2 hours and I buy nothing. And imagine the data that they have. We all know this, right? They know how much time I work. They know me, first of all. They have built a profile about me. They know what I'm looking at. What books did I touch upon? What books did I spend more time on? And at the time, in real time, while I am interacting with them, I'm generating data which they use in real time. In real time, they can tell me, hey, you know what? There are other people who have written this book, or the same author has written other books, or these are reviews of this book, and so on and so forth. So there's a huge difference between what you can do with episodic data and interactive data. And my point is that even these digital platforms, it took them some time to figure out the value of that interactive data. That is what fuels a lot of their power in today's world. That is, they are able to capture that interactive data, use it over a period of time to develop deep, pinpointed individual profiles, and also in real time use it to share it with other entities and create very new digital experiences, which we can't do with episodic data alone. The episodic data is a value saying, okay, how many books were sold in this store, what is moving, same thing with Blockbuster, right? They would know, which titles are moving and so on and so forth. So there's a huge new value that was generated by interactive data. Now, for the longest time, like we said, we thought of them as tech companies and we were our own companies, and that has changed because what products can do today with sensors and IoT, that products and services can also generate interactive data the way a Facebook, an Uber, or an Amazon does. And they can also get into this or tap into this new value that the platforms have stumbled into. And how to do that is what I write about in the book. And of course, a fundamental nugget for thinking about this is this difference between episodic and interactive data.
Thank you, Mohan. This was very, very clear. It was explaining the difference between episodic and interactive data, but you used Amazon as a case, as an exhibit, as an illustration. And that is one of those gigantic digital platforms. And so you earlier said legacy firms do not necessarily have to become one, and it may be also difficult to become one like Amazon. So what would the difference between episodic and interactive data make for a legacy firm? I remember you mentioned in a side conversation that you had stumbled across great examples. There was an asthma inhaler, which stuck with me because my grandfather, he wished he had that. Can you expand on what a legacy firm can do with interactive data? How could they get this, and how could they use this?
Thank you, Patrick. So, and I appreciate, you're bringing the asthma example. And by the way, just like you have, a personal example of asthma, my wife happens to be a pediatric pulmonologist. Okay, so she for the longest time we were in Boston, and she used to work at the Boston's Children's Hospital. A vast majority of her patients were asthma patients. So whatever I'm going to talk to you about asthma and inhalers, it comes from her. So you have to.
Of course, I believe it.
Yeah, it is true.
Of
right?
course.
Okay. But anyway, let's get back right to the example or comparison between an Amazon, and say an asthma inhaler. So the common point is what? The common point is a sensor, which did not exist earlier. So in the old world, what did the asthma inhaler do? It has a medication that is in a canister. There's a plunger, and if you would have seen those inhalers that you angle it in your mouth and press the plunger, and the medication goes into your lungs. And now these medications can be regular prescribed or used in prescribed ways, take one puff twice a day or whatever, or they could be used for sudden attacks, right? Which is, you get a sudden attack and then you use it. And so there are ways. And the standard, I call them standard inhalers, they also had a mechanical counter in which you would know how many doses are left. Okay, so that's the standard inhaler. That's the industrial world. And the only data they could get is episodic data. How many inhalers are selling? What's the contribution margin? How much of the inhalers are lying in which inventory, warehouse, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So that's traditional inhalers, episodic data. Now, what happens if you add a sensor to the inhaler? Now, there are a bunch of new features that start coming. So I'll separate them into what I call basic features and advanced features. And there's a reason for that, which I'll explain very quickly. So what are the basic features over a traditional inhaler? So first of all, because of the sensor, you are actually interacting with the sensor 24/7. Even if you're not using the inhaler, it is lying somewhere. It is giving data in terms of location. Now, why is that important? Because if you get a sudden attack, you need to know where it is. It can give you reminders to take your dose. So why is it important? It improves compliance, right? Which is good for the patient, good for the doctors, also good for insurance companies, because they know that they are subsidizing your inhaler through your health insurance, and they want to make sure that you don't fall sick and land up in the emergency room. They can also remind you to carry your inhaler with you when you go outside. And that's a very powerful feature because it can even save your life. And there are cases where people have forgotten to take their inhaler with them, and they've gotten into some serious trouble and lost their lives even, right? So, but I still call them basic features for a reason, but they're not mean features. They're pretty, you would agree, powerful features, far more than what a traditional inhaler gave, which was essentially, giving you the medication. Now, this gives you the medication properties, and on top of that, helps you better use the inhaler for improving your health, saving your lives. Okay. Now, what more can it do? Now, because it is interacting with you, in real time, it can share certain data, like your location data, with third-party entities. For example, an entity that tracks pollution in a location, or pollen in a location, or mold. There are lots of companies that essentially give you devices that you can put in your homes which track mold. Okay. Now, why are these important? Because these are traditional triggers for asthmatic attacks. Now, what does that feature do? It essentially warns you that you're walking into an area where you could get an attack. Over a period of time, it can even predict the likelihood that you'll get an attack. Okay. Difference from episodic data, that this is now coming from pinpointed sources, which it knows that Patrick is likely, I'm not saying Patrick, but Patrick is likely to get an attack because of pollen, and you're walking into an area where there is so much of pollen, and it can tell you the likelihood for you to get an attack. And okay, so you prepare yourselves. Now, what is the difference between these basic features, which is about location and reminders of doses, and these kinds of features, which are essentially, predicting an attack? So the first set of basic features, the features don't change with the number of people using the smart inhaler. Whether it is just me using it or just Patrick using it, it will still give you the same feature of the location and reminder. It will give you the same thing, right? In many ways, it is similar to the properties of the medication, which also do not change with the number of people using the medication. The advanced features, they are very, very dependent on what we call network size. They are dependent on the number of people who are involved with that smart inhaler. So what's that network? It is people like me who are using it. And so if there are 1 million people like me using that inhaler, you're generating far more data that essentially starts making the algorithms more powerful and more accurate. So it has competitive ramifications, because if you are competing with a smart inhaler company and you have 10 people who are buying a smart inhaler, and your competitor is having a smart inhaler that has a market size of 30 million or 40 million, their algorithms would be far more powerful. You may not even be able to give that feature of predicting an attack, right? So there's a big difference with network size. And this network size is not just about the customers who are buying your smart inhaler. These are those third-party entities. They also become very important, which is, if I'm in Zurich, do I have people telling me about, there's no pollution in Zurich, but anyway, talking about pollen or talking about dust or talking about mold. So wherever you go, is there a network already there? Now you see the similarities with Uber here, isn't it? That is, for Uber to be what it is, it has had to build a network of drivers and riders in every city that they are in. It doesn't matter to me as a customer in Lausanne if they have 1 million drivers and riders in Zurich. Okay. In the same way, the smart inhaler now has to build those kinds of networks. So you see how the challenges before these kinds of companies. But there are some basic features that they can offer with data. Then there's features that depend on network size. Now, that smart inhaler example allows us to, whittle down many, many elements where you can see the comparisons with Amazon. First of all, just like with Amazon, it can create individual profiles, and it can know what are the triggers for me as opposed to general triggers. And second, it can connect me to an external network wherein I get in real time, I get a lot of alerts and a lot of experiences, which I could not get with a standard inhaler. So you see that just like Amazon does much more than Barnes & Noble in terms of, it's not just facilitating an exchange of books, which is what they started with using the internet, but they evolved into what they are today because of what they do with interactive data. And for me, my dream is that we should have legacy companies understanding these frameworks in a fair degree of rigor and detail, that they can start shaping their business models to tap into that value and move into that domain.
This is great, Mohan. Thank you. Thanks a lot for this additional example that shows the value of interactive data over episodic data, and especially the basic and advanced features that lead legacy firms to benefit from these network effects. That's absolutely fantastic. And I see a lot of chat, as you all see, in reaction to what you say. So first of all, the metaphor of data being the new gold or oil is catching on quite a bit. And many comments are on how useful it is for legacy firms to delve into the data that they already have internally, and to optimize operations. And especially in marketing interactions, there may be a lot of data that is already fairly easily accessible to firms in this space. So that's great that you're all engaging. So please send questions or send comments. We'll take them as they go. Despina had the last comment here. So data is now a critical resource that fuels the modern economy and business. And then finally, Bogdan says, so you need to build local ecosystems for data, and algorithms have value. That is super brainy. Let's take a step back and then get there to ecosystems and algorithms. Mohan, you have you are a very, very experienced strategy professor. So that kind of suggests you come out of a world where in this industry boundaries, value chains, Warren Buffett's moats around companies matter a lot. And now you're talking about something that is quite different. In fact, you're talking about the future of competitive strategy, and you address themes, topics like Bogdan just now, that you label new digital ecosystems. That sounds fantastic, but also daunting. It is a bit daunting. So can you expand on this, please?
Okay. So my role of me and my book is to actually make sure that it is not daunting, right? That it is simple to understand, and the logic is very clear. Okay. So you're right. I come from a competitive strategy background, as we all understand that world. I always say that world has three primary anchors. Okay, one we talked about earlier, which is products. Products is the central thing because all the revenues come from products, and products, of course, is the central thing here. Now, to make products work, we have value chains, which is the other second pillar of our traditional thinking of competitive strategy. And value chains are essentially a whole interdependent set of activities, right from raw materials to the time the product reaches the customer. So everything around operations and R&D and product development and marketing, everything comes into that. Now, why are value chains important? They help you position your products. So a Nike is different from a New Balance because the value chains are differently organized. So we know that. Also, value chains, in many ways, circumscribe your business scope, which is the product can do only as much as what your value chains are designed to do. And they kind of define your business scope. Now, the third very important thing, which competitive strategy people all swear by, is the nature of the industry you are in. So why is that? Because the nature of the industry, or what we call in strategy lingo, industry structure, these are things like barriers to entry, or the moat that you talked about, as what Warren Buffett talks about, scale intensity, the degree of rivalry and intensity. Anybody who's gone to a business school would remember the 5 Force framework, very famous framework, right? This came from 1979, 1980, essentially gave the underpinnings of how a product can generate value, which is these structural characteristics and the value chain, which kind of drive products, essentially determine how profitable you can be. So if the industry structure is attractive, like in the case of Coke, Pepsi, they can make 75 to 80% gross margins. In other cases, you might have a terrific product. Even Intel with its great microchips are now struggling in terms of margins. Why? Because the structure of the industry has changed. So if you think about competitive strategy from traditional times, it was about what product, what markets, how do you organize your value chains, and how do you marshal the forces in the industry to actually drive competitive advantage. That's what we understood. Okay. Now, what is different now? Big difference is that we want to generate value not just from products, but from data. Now, data and driving value from data can come from value chains, but they can also come from digital platforms. Now, with the Googles and Facebooks, it's primarily the digital platforms. But for legacy firms, some of that value can come from their value chains, but they have to elevate that value chain into a different kind of network, which is what I call a production ecosystem. And what is it? Essentially, going back, what is a digital ecosystem fundamentally? Digital ecosystem fundamentally is a network of data generators and data recipients. We understand that from Uber, drivers, riders, they all generate data, we share data. Now, going back to value chains is also a network. Okay, that you have suppliers, you have R&D, you have warehouses, you have manufacturing. And we already have a network in which we are generating and sharing data through IT systems. So we already have a digital ecosystem in place in your value chain. Now, that network can be enhanced by having much more interactive data. Okay, and I'll come to that very shortly. Okay, so essentially I'm saying that in the old world with products, you can think about value chains and say how I'm going to organize it. And you're using data there, but largely essentially to make your value chains more efficient. But in today's world, these value chains, when they are seen as production ecosystems, which is one part of a digital ecosystem that I'll talk about, they can do more. So go back to the inhaler, that if the inhaler is tracking your location and giving you reminders, that is happening because this value chain has brought in elements of real-time data sharing and using interactive data for new features that go beyond what the features that were delivered by its traditional value chain. Its traditional value chain knew how to deliver medication. Okay. Now, as a production ecosystem, that value chain is now delivering a new data-driven service, which is to say that, hey, if you want data, if you want a service that tracks your location and gives you reminders to take your dose or reminders to carry your inhaler with you, give me $5 a month. That's a data-driven service. Now you see how your old value chain has elevated into a digital ecosystem, which I call production ecosystems. And you're now elevating the value from that value chain from operational efficiencies to new data-driven services. That's one part of a digital ecosystem. The other part is what I call a consumption ecosystem. This was non-existent in the industrial world, which is in the industrial world, my value chain, like I said, determined business scope. I sold my inhaler to you, and that was the end of it. If I'm a light bulb maker, I sell you a light bulb, and then that's the end of it. I don't care what you do with the light bulb. It's your problem and your headache to find sockets and wiring and electricity. It's not my headache, right? Why? Sockets, wiring, and electricity are what we call complements, and almost all products have complements. In the digital world, you're discovering new complements that can be connected with data. So in the smart inhaler example, a third-party entity that is giving you data, real-time data on pollen or mold or pollution is a new complement to this inhaler. In the old world, I sold you the inhaler, my business scope ended with the value chain. Now, this value chain can be extended into a digital platform. Why is it a digital platform? Because it is behaving exactly like Uber now, because I'm connecting the user to a third-party entity, just like Amazon is connecting it through data, or an Uber is connecting through data. So now you have a value chain that has become a production ecosystem, and then you have beyond your value chain all these complements that were there, but we never paid attention to it. But these new complements are creating a new digital ecosystem for you to tap value from. So the inhaler company has a choice. How much do I go for it? I can use my value chain, use a lot of IT, and maybe use a lot of AI to manage my inventory and things like that and improve my operational efficiencies. Or I can go forward and say, I'm going to use data-driven services and I'm going to expand my revenue streams beyond products to data. Or I can go even beyond and say, I'm going to create a platform. So you see how the old model of just products value chains are now shifting to data and digital ecosystems. The third part, industry, which we talked about. Industries were great to amplify the value of products, but industries do nothing to amplify the value of data. And for that, you need these digital ecosystems. So if you want to amplify the value of your data in terms of what your inhaler is generating, the bigger your consumption ecosystem and the bigger the network in which you connect the users to other complements, the more value you get, the more the value of your data gets amplified. So you see, the way I'm looking at it is I'm taking insights from the platforms, or more specifically from the Facebooks of the world, but I'm applying it to a legacy firm like an inhaler company. It can be a bank. So how do you get interactive data? Through apps. It doesn't have to be a physical sensor. Now, in China, if I just give an example, because a lot of people from services out here, the Tencents and Alibabas of the world, which we all understand as massive digital platforms, they have managed to take away about 45 to 50% of the market share from traditional banks in China, like Bank of China or Industrial Bank of China, in consumer loans, in deposits, and small and medium enterprise loans also. Now, why is that? Because they understand how customers use money. If you want to buy a car, what do? You go into search, they know you're looking for a car. If you're chatting with your friends, they know what kind of car you want. And they know the right time. They know your credit history. They know the right time when they can ask you, hey, you're looking for a car, you want a loan? We'll give you a loan. And by the way, if you take loans from us and you also park your salary with us rather than the bank, we'll give you a break on the interest rate. So in one shot, the loans business goes, and the other shot, the deposits business goes. Now, why is it connected with these digital ecosystems? Banks traditionally have focused only on their production ecosystems. They know how to sell loans. These companies know how you use loans. You can sell money. They know how you use money. They are in the consumption ecosystems of banks, and they are walking into the production ecosystems of banks. Now, the point to be seen here is that, by the way, what has happened in China may not happen here or in India or wherever you are in this world because of a whole variety of regulations and lots of other complications. But it doesn't take away the power of the concept, which is that industries do not amplify the value of data. Digital ecosystems do. The power of a Tencent and WeChat in the banking world is because they have very powerful consumption ecosystems. And that is what gives them the ability to amplify the value of the data that they're getting from millions and millions of people and come into businesses that were not traditionally meant to be theirs. So we never thought of them as bankers, but they are. So there are a lot of things happening, and that's why this shift from value chains to digital ecosystems is very important. Business scope is not just defined by the value chain, it can be extended into new consumption ecosystems through platforms.
So thank you, Mohan. I learned from your book and now from this source that it's a bit too simplistic to think of ecosystems as just extended industries. There's much more to this, and you described this very, very well. I would like to move on to another question. You had this concept of interactive data. And in the book, you show clearly how important it is to define different stages. You call this tiers in the development of companies towards greater usage and leverage of data. And so what I would like to do is to actually launch a poll and ask show you the framework, and then launch a poll to ask you where you are on this spectrum. So Mohan, why don't you explain briefly how to understand these 4 tiers, and then we'll ask the participants on where they are, and then in the remainder of the time we give them some insight on how they might move along this spectrum.
Great. So now we have introduced 2 key ideas so far, right, of the book. One is the difference between episodic data and interactive data. Interactive data comes through you streaming, either through physical sensors or apps or the internet, in whichever way you want to get it. That's one idea. And the other idea is this understanding of digital ecosystems as a combination of production and consumption ecosystems. So production ecosystems are digital networks that are built around your existing value chains. And consumption ecosystems are extension of your value chains into digital platforms, right? So that is what we explained so far. And so this comes together in this framework, which tells you that there are a variety of ways to capture value from data. And what we mean by digital transformation is not a generic thing. And by the way, that's another motivation to write the book, because in today's world, digital transformation is probably one of the most abused phrases that we see. Anything you do some ERP systems, digital transformation. You do some cloud services, anything is digital transformation. Anything digital is digital transformation. So that's not really true, right? So what this framework does is that it lays out what is the full scope of value that is possible and where do you want to be, right? Every firm doesn't have to do everything. And in many ways, that becomes your strategy, which is what tier am I in, what tier should I be in, and what tier should I go into?
Allow me a question here. I see that it is there's something expanding, broadening from the left to the right. What is this? Profits, revenue, or just headache because it becomes more and more complex?
Okay, so I think the latter is closer. So this is not necessarily capturing value in terms of what the graph or the images are showing. It is showing you the challenges, opportunities and challenges. Let's put it that way. So, and maybe I'll come back to it after we explain the 4 tiers, right?
Okay.
So on the left-hand side, you see production ecosystems and 1 tier involved with consumption ecosystems. Okay, so everything, the first 3 tiers are from your value chain. And in your value chain, you can get interactive data just from your value chain assets. So Ford, for example, in their manufacturing plants, they use augmented reality, virtual reality in their inspection of paint. And by replacing visual inspection with this interactive data, they are able to reduce defects. Now, there's a lot of value there, okay? So I'm not trying to map the relative value across this. But why is it the least of the tiers or least of the challenges? Because from tier 2 onwards, that interactive data has to come from customers. And assets don't complain, right? Customers do. And selling or getting customers to give you interactive data is a very different kind of challenge, which the book goes into a lot more detail. The concept called digital customers, or customers who give you interactive data, and how do you get them and what are the challenges? So that's a whole chapter in the book. So if you get into tier 2, you can get interactive data from customers, but still use it only for efficiencies. And it happens because some companies just cannot think of generating revenues from that data. So Procter & Gamble, for example, has their diapers, the Pampers. Now, you can't put sensors on Pampers, and you can't really think of and it's still not obvious whether you can generate revenues from them. But what do? They have these CRM programs, where customer relationship management programs, where they offer a lot of interesting content on parenting. So that attracts millions of people. Some of them are existing customers, some of them are not. And they come and then they start interacting and they get access to that data. And then there are ways by which they can start pinpointing, who's interacting in what ways, and get very valuable information about, whether they're a first-time parent or a second-time parent, or, a whole bunch of things. And what do they use it for? They use it for micro-targeting ads. So it's still efficiency enhancement, which is that I'm, increasing the efficiencies of my ad spend. Tier 2. Tier 3 is when you start generating revenues from that data, right? So if the inhaler example that I gave, that if you start charging $10 a month for reminders of doses, that is tier 3. Again, it is coming from your production ecosystems, which is that the delivery of that service is fundamentally generated and managed through your value chain. Then comes tier 4, where now the smart inhaler is connecting you to third-party entities and now behaving as a digital platform. Now it's getting into the consumption ecosystems. Now you can see how the level of difficulty starts enhancing. But why is it connected to strategy? Is that it helps you determine where are you today in this framework and where should you be and how do you get there. Yeah.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Mohan, for going through this a bit in detail. This is great. This gave everyone time to see where they are. And let me launch a quick poll to see then where everyone is so that we can share this. It's just a list of the tiers that you've just seen. So are you still trying to use data only for operational efficiencies, or are you already a little bit advanced on this stage, tier 2, operational efficiencies advanced, or are you into data-driven services from value chains, or are you already in this tier 4 where you enhance services with data from digital platforms? So, Mohan, what do you see? Is this a typical pattern?
True.
And do all firms in all industries have the same opportunities to move up between tier 1, 2, and from 2 to 3, and from 3 to 4? Please explain.
So the answer, whether all firms can be in all 4 tiers, the answer is no. Again, it depends on your business. It depends on your the nature of your business, your capacity to actually capture what kind of data. If you are a B2B business and if you're way down somewhere, it is harder many times. At the same time, being a B2C business doesn't necessarily mean that you can get into tier 4 and do everything. So there are a lot of contingencies that go into this. But let me give some examples. You could be an oil and gas. I saw some company participants from the extraction business. Oil and gas, huge amount of modern technologies, billions of dollars of investments. For what? For artificial intelligence to gauge where should I drill, sensors across thousands and thousands of miles of pipelines, which in real time tell me and predict the probability that there could be a leakage somewhere, saving, millions and millions of dollars, or a whole bunch of stuff in their refineries and things which essentially improve their operational efficiency. So to answer again, going back to your question, there's a lot of value you can get from tier 1. Okay. The question here is, though, that are you doing enough in your tier 1 is something to think about. What more can you do? And that's the difference again, that is, are you really tapping into the power of interactive data to do things? Now, tier 2, again, like I said, with P&G or a whole bunch of consumer packaged goods companies, it's not very easy to generate data-driven service. In fact, one of the big problems of FMCG companies today is that they do not even have access to first-party data. The Amazons have cornered that. In the old world, it was fine. I didn't care, whether it was Amazon or Walmart. I just sold to you and you did the rest. But today they're hungry for, the kind of data to track what customers are doing, but they don't have access. So it'll take a while before they try figuring out. They have to figure out what to do in tier 2. Forget about going into tier 3. Tier 3, the challenges are different. Tier 3, the challenges are in terms of, how do I get the data? How do I get customers to give me data? How do I convince customers about my benefits? Remember with the smart inhaler example also that some of these benefits come only with a lot of people giving you that data. If I'm a smart toothbrush company and I say, hey, buy my toothbrush, I'll predict cavities for you. You cannot predict cavities unless there are 10 million people who are giving you data, probably, right? So there's a lot of issues about even if you have the intent to go there. And of course, it requires different business models, which we are talking about in the book. And finally, the biggest challenge is, that even that can you create a platform? That is, some businesses, like say, if you are a dishwasher, now you can get data from customers, and maybe you can give some data-driven services to say that I'll predict if a motor is going to break. But can I create a platform? Probably not, right? Because I can't immediately find natural complements that I can digitally connect to. So the point, though, however, is the framework helps in ensuring, first of all, that you are not You're not leaving money on the table and walking away, number one. And the framework helps in recognizing the possibilities of new competitors who could come into different parts of your digital ecosystem, like the banks, right? So for the banks, they didn't see the consumption ecosystem at all. And then all of a sudden realized, oh my God, these people are in banking.
Yes.
So that's the way I see the value of this way of thinking.
Wonderful, wonderful. Talking about this banking example from China, that is obviously amazing. But when we think about how Apple is moving from dropping computers from the name into the iPhones and all the stories that you know, and now Apple Pay, they're essentially doing something very, very similar to what you've just explained. And looking at us, seeing that we both wear glasses, and you've just mentioned that many legacy firms don't even see the opportunities. Let me address the last topic before we go into more questions from the audience. In the book, you describe that actually legacy firms are often myopic. In what ways? What are the digital myopias that you see most frequently, and what could they do about them?
Right. So you're absolutely right. So digital myopia is what I call the inability to see the full value of data and digital ecosystems. So I talk about 5 traps, of digital myopia. So one is a product trap. That is, if I refuse to see value from data, it's like with this inhaler, that I'm making money with my inhalers. Why should I get into a smart inhaler? Why should I do things with data? And I'm not really interested in doing that, or I'm not seeing it. Right. The second is what I call the value chain trap, which is that I define my business scope based on the value chain. Again, going back to the smart inhaler example, if I don't see the consumption ecosystem, I don't see the value. So, like I said, traditionally, we have never seen compliments very seriously, like with the light bulb. I don't care about wiring and electricity. That's not my business. But in today's world, there are connected complements that become part of your world. And if you don't see them, that's the value chain trap. Third is what I call the operational efficiency trap, which is again connected with the 4 tiers. That is, we have a tendency to think about modern technologies as an extension of what we did with IT. So IT was all about operational efficiencies. So, you tell me, hey, AI, how should I use AI? Well, if it improves my operational efficiencies, I'm happy to invest. But I want to use AI to start driving new data-driven services. I'm not very sure, because I'm unfamiliar with those risk-reward trade-offs, in terms of how am I using technology. Then I see customer traps, which is I see customers as people who buy my products and then I forget about them. I sell you a product and then you're off. I don't see them as sources for new kinds of data, because I'm so fixated on episodic data. And finally, I call the competitor trap, which is I see competitors as those who sell similar products. I don't see them as those who have access to similar data. So the Alibaba 10-cent example is these are digital competitors because they have access to the same kind of data that you should be having. Okay, but they have better access than you. So in the earlier world, I said I'm better than my competitor because I have a better product. Now it is about who has better access to data. And if that data is coming in your realm, that is, it's part of your consumption ecosystem, they are competitors and you better be careful. And if you don't see them, that's another form of a digital myop trap. So that's what I call, and that's in some ways in the introduction, I put it as one of the motivations of the book, is to expand our thinking beyond this industrial world and start moving into the digital world.
Thanks. That's absolutely fantastic. We have about 5 minutes left. There's a wealth of questions in the chat, several comments that are fascinating. Some cluster more around the topic of how do you how do you ensure that privacy concerns, doubts, risks are handled with proper governance? Could you expand on this a little bit?
And by the way, I have a whole chapter in the book around that. Okay, so it's a very, very important thing. The moment you start talking about customer data and sharing customer data, it's obviously a very big thing. Now, one of the issues, right, with one of the problems or challenges that legacy firms have, in my thinking, is that unfortunately these digital platforms operated, like in the Wild West for many years, and they have basically abused their power in terms of what they have done with customer data. So it is an uphill battle for legacy firms to make the claim that they are not going to do things like what they are doing, what the platforms have done. So it's a bigger onus. And what is the onus? The onus is about a few things. One is focus on the value, real value that you're giving customers. Think about this, that if you're predicting an asthmatic attack and saving lives, in that context, a customer may likely be able to not care so much about privacy concerns. So it's about the relative benefit as opposed to the cost of privacy. It's always a trade-off. And there are always customer segments around that. Some customers may say, I don't want to give out anything. Some customers may say, well, for this value, we have all had these experiences. You travel by flight and, you put your luggage inside somewhere, it doesn't come. And then you stand around, at the airport for 2 hours and then you go in a line. Now, all these things can be sorted out, right, with interactive data that you can, your app can tell you, hey, your luggage didn't come. Now, are you giving up privacy? You bet, right? You're telling somebody where you're going. Now, if you care about that, you want, right? But the question is that there is a value to it and you want to go after that. And of course, you want to be ethical. If you want to think of the long run in this. More broadly, I feel that the genie is out of the bottle. Okay, that's where the world is going, whether you like it or not. And you have to navigate through this. I firmly believe that the world of pure products, and those days are numbered. Slowly and steadily, we will be forced to get into this new world and figure out what we are going to do in this new world and do it in a way where we are ethical, we follow rules, regulations, we find ways to lobby so that we can get our way. But for that, you have to have that conviction in your mind that what you're trying to do is to generate a real benefit.
This is great. Maybe one last point. Several questions touch upon the potential to use digital ecosystems and the power of data for not only generating revenue and profits, but also to reduce wastage of energy and resources. What's your take on sustainability, Mohan?
Absolutely. So this is a huge opportunity. And again, goes with the earlier point about privacy. Couple of things here. Number one, that B2B businesses have lesser issues with privacy than B2C. There's far more potential for B2B businesses to establish new benefits. A lot of those benefits could be in the sustainability zone, which is even by simple things in terms of tracking and doing things, there's a lot of stuff that you can add value to. And you can even generate new revenues and have new business models because of that. So those are all new opportunities. And I completely agree with the caller that that is absolutely true.
Thank you very much, Mohan. Thanks to everyone on this book club edition for your presence, your engagement, the wonderful questions and comments and links that you shared with yourselves and us. We'll follow up on this surely, and we'll hope that you will be here next time when we will not have the pleasure to meet Mohan Subramaniam again.
But I must say, before we go, please go and buy the book.
Oh, absolutely. That was the parting gift, of course. Yes. we will not have the pleasure to see this professor of strategy and digital transformation on this book club for a short period of time, I guess. But you will surely enjoy the next edition of the book club as soon as the announcement is there. I hope you register and attend as engaged as you did today. Mohan, thank you very much. That was amazing.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for your time. Really appreciate it. And all the best to all of you.
Postscript, it is a great book. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.